Have you ever woken up on what felt like a normal morning, only to discover that your entire marriage was nothing but a mask, crafted to hide greed, manipulation, and betrayal I loved as a man for 7 years? I believed in the dream we were building together, until the day my grandfather, the only person who ever truly loved me, passed away, and left me an inheritance that wasn't just money. It was the truth. The truth about a husband who only seemed gentle. The truth about traps that had been set long before I even knew they existed. And on the day I walked into that so-called family dinner, I realized I could either sign those papers and lose everything, or I could stand up and take back the right to own my life. This is my story. Chapter 1, The Dawn Call. I never thought a phone call at 6:47 a.m. could change the entire course of my life. But it did. The shrill ring of the phone shattered my restless sleep, and as I reached for it, still dazed, the voice on the other end jolted me completely awake. "Good morning, Mrs. Clare Whitmore. This is Attorney Harrison. I'm calling regarding the reading of your grandfather, Edward Whitmore's will. There are a few unexpected details. Could you come to my office at 10 this morning?" I shot upright in bed, my heart weighed down by grief. His funeral had just taken place 3 days ago. The scent of lilies from the service still seemed to linger faintly in my hair, sweet yet somber, haunting in a way that was hard to bear. He was the man who raised me after the accident took my parents when I was only 12, the only solid anchor I had in my life. Beside me, Colin, my husband, was still fast asleep. He instinctively reached out to find me and mumbled, "What's going on, babe? It's from a lawyer. They want to meet about Grandpa's will." That's what I said. But the truth was, there was something in Mr. Harrison's voice that made my stomach twist, a strange mix of compassion and caution. I couldn't tell if it was a bad sign or a good one. I only knew I couldn't ignore it. I got out of bed, my mind still spinning from the loss, but also filled with curiosity. Had Grandpa left me something? A keepsake, maybe, the old pocket watch he always carried. Or perhaps just a final farewell message. 2 hours later, I was at the lawyer's office, a room paneled in dark wood, heavy with the scent of leather and old paper, like it belonged to a different era. Attorney Harrison sat across from me, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose as he opened a thick envelope. My name was written on it in handwriting I recognized instantly as Grandpa's. "My beloved granddaughter, Clare Elizabeth Whitmore, I leave to you my entire estate, real estate investments, and cash, totaling approximately $2.4 million. I froze. I couldn't speak. My mind was spinning with those numbers. I had assumed he would divide everything evenly among the cousins. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I'd be mentioned in the new will. But no. Everything from the classic house on Maple Street where I grew up, to the family-owned hardware store that had lasted 3 generations, and the portfolio he had so painstakingly built, was being handed entirely to me. No splitting, no conditions. I stared at the envelope before me with that familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, and then I read Grandpa's final words. "Dearest Clare, if you're reading this, I've gone to join your grandmother. Don't cry, sweetheart. I lived a full life, and being your grandfather was the greatest blessing of all. I leave you everything, not because you need it, but because you deserve it. You were the only one who never cared about the money. Remember, when I offered to buy you a new car at 16, you asked to fix up that old Ford in the garage because it had its own story to tell. While your cousins kept asking about property and stocks, you only asked me about childhood memories, your grandmother's garden, and the dreams I'd left behind. I could barely breathe. Each word felt like a squeeze to my heart. And then he mentioned Colin. I worry about your husband, Clare. I've seen the way he looks when money is brought up. Be cautious. Not everyone who says they love you loves you for the right reasons." I folded the letter and held it tight against my chest, as if doing so might bring him back to me one last time. And for the first time, I began to look at my marriage with the eyes of someone who had finally been warned. Chapter 2. When greed reveals itself. I returned home late in the afternoon, still overwhelmed with emotion. The envelope with the check confirming the inheritance, $2.4 million, sat deep in my handbag, feeling as heavy as the world itself. Not because of the money's value, but because of Grandpa's final words. They hadn't left my mind since the moment I folded the letter shut. When I stepped into the house, Colin was sitting in the kitchen laptop, open face full of hope. He looked up at the sound of the door, flashing that familiar smile, the one I used to love so deeply. But this time, it sent a chill down my spine. "So what did he leave you?" he asked, voice a little too eager to sound natural. I took off my coat, set my bag on the chair, and looked him straight in the eye. He left me everything. The coffee mug in Colin's hand dropped to the floor. Porcelain shattered and coffee splattered everywhere. He stood frozen, then whispered as if he couldn't believe it. "Everything, you mean?" "The entire estate," I nodded. "The house, the store, the stocks, the cash. All of it's in my name." I hadn't even finished speaking when he burst out laughing, a loud, excited laugh that felt almost greedy. "Do you realize what this means, Claire? We'll never have to worry again. I can finally quit that dead-end job. Invest in the startup Jake and I talked about. We could buy that lake cabin, travel across Europe. Baby, everything is about to change. He'd barely heard the news and was already making plans to spend the money. Not a single question about how I felt. Not a flicker of emotion about Grandpa. Just schemes about how to spend it all. I knelt to pick up the broken mug, my hands trembling. Every word from Grandpa's letter echoed like a warning bell. Not everyone who says they love you loves you for the right reasons. Before I would have smiled and nodded at Colin, tried to understand his excitement, said, "Sure, let's take it slow and make a plan." But this time I stayed silent. I looked at the man I once trusted and saw someone I no longer recognized. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the bed we'd shared for 7 years, wondering how much of my life was real and how much of it was a lie. I started piecing things together. The times Colin quietly moved money between accounts, the untraceable expenses, the moments he said, "Let me handle it, you don't need to worry," and I had believed him. The next morning, as I got up early to make coffee, I saw his phone light up on the kitchen table, a message from Colin sent from the bedroom. "Mom's invited everyone to dinner Sunday. 2 p.m., don't forget. The whole family will be there." I stared at the words. So brief, so neat, so cold. Something felt off. Colin never used periods in his messages, and he never called dinner at his mom's a gathering. After last night, everything about it felt wrong. Still, I replied okay. I needed to know what he was planning. I needed to see clearly the man Grandpa had warned me about, and I began to prepare for it, not with emotion, but with logic. I wouldn't let anyone take what Grandpa left me. Not this time. Chapter 3, The Family Gathering. And the trap Sunday arrived under a gray, heavy sky, just like my mood. I stopped by the cemetery before heading to Colin's mother's house. Placing a bouquet of white roses on Grandpa's grave, I whispered softly, "I won't let them take away the gift you left me. I promise." Colin's mother's house wasn't far, but today it felt like I was driving into unfamiliar territory. As I turned into the driveway, the first thing I noticed were the cars. Expensive, luxurious cars, none of them belonging to any relatives of Colin that I knew. Before I could ring the doorbell, Colin opened the door, his face tight with what looked like a forced smile. "Claire, you're here. Right on time." I stepped inside and immediately felt something was different. There was no warm scent of baked goods, no TV murmuring in the background. No one laughed. No one hugged me. The living room had been rearranged, chairs placed in a circle. On the table lay stacks of documents, and 2 men in suits, clearly lawyers or consultants, were already waiting. My heart pounded. Claire Colin began trying to sound casual. "This is Robert Hriss and James Morrison. They're financial advisors, specialists in estate planning. I invited them to help us Manage the massive inheritance from your grandfather. I forced a smile. Manage us, as in, who exactly? He looked at me, but didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the two men who immediately launched into a flood of jargon, asset trusts, legal restructuring, joint ownership, tax optimization. Everything aimed at one goal, getting me to sign to give Colin shared control. I turned to Evan, Colin's younger brother. He avoided my eyes, staring out the window. Sandra, my mother-in-law, had disappeared into the kitchen, staying clear of it all. It was obvious someone in the family knew this was wrong, but no one dared speak. I swallowed my anger and sat down, picking up the packet they'd placed in front of me. My eyes scanned quickly, keywords danced across the pages: asset, transfer withdrawal rights without consent, executive authority. I took a deep breath and smiled. You gentlemen have done your homework, but I haven't had my own lawyer review these yet. Wouldn't it be a bit rushed to sign today? The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Colin clenched his jaw. Claire, don't make this complicated. I'm just trying to do what's best for both of us. For both of us, I repeated, locking eyes with him. Or just for you, silence. Then I gently placed the folder back on the table. By the way, I added lightly, I brought someone too. My attorney, Mrs. Deborah Lane. She specializes in estate protection. I figured she might have a few thoughts. The door opened. Deborah stepped in, her silver hair neatly pinned, her eyes sharp as glass. She nodded once, and the room went dead silent. Colin went pale. Good afternoon, Deborah said. I hope I'm not interrupting this little financial consultation. I caught Colin's gaze. In his eyes I saw confusion, fear, and anger. The kind of anger that bubbles up when a manipulator realizes their prey is no longer beneath them. For the first time in our marriage, I saw Colin lose. And that wasn't even the end of it. Chapter 4. The Fall of the Manipulator. Deborah sat down across from me. She didn't say much, just opened her brown leather briefcase, pulled out her reading glasses, and began examining each document on the table with a calm, focused gaze that was almost frightening. The two lawyers Colin had brought in, Robert and James, tried to keep their composure, but I could see the unease in every blink, every nervous shuffle as they tidied up the papers. People used to manipulating others often have no idea what to do when someone actually understands the rules of the game. There's a clause for immediate liquidation of assets. Deborah frowned. Who approved this? Robert spoke up, his voice slightly shaky. We thought it would be the most efficient way to handle the inheritance. Deborah looked up, eyes cold as steel handle. Someone else's assets. No one answered. I glanced at Colin. He was pale, but I wasn't finished. I placed a thick folder on the table right next to their prepared documents. If we're talking about transparency, I said then, I think these documents might also be relevant to this discussion. Deborah opened the file. Page after page of bank statements, suspicious withdrawals from our joint account card, purchases, failed crypto investments, all in Colin's name. Without a single authorization from me. I picked up my phone, opened the voice recorder. Colin, I said, locking eyes with my ex-husband, do you remember last Tuesday night? He frowned. I pressed play. Colin's voice played faint but clear. Once Claire signs the papers, I'll have joint ownership rights. Jake says the old man's antique collection is worth at least 6 figures. If we sell fast, we'll cash out big. The room fell silent. Everyone was frozen. Even Evan, Colin's younger brother, who had avoided looking at me earlier, now stood with his mouth agape. Colin shouted, That was a joke, a fake recording. You can't use that against Deborah. Cut him off. She pulled out another document this time, a medical evaluation of my grandfather's mental competency. It was conducted by his private doctor just 2 weeks before his death. Dr. Patricia Williams, the report she read aloud. Patient is mentally sound, no signs of cognitive decline, fully capable of making independent legal decisions. And this, she added, holding up a handwritten letter, has been verified as his handwriting. I pulled out Grandpa's notarized letter. I stood up. I read. I leave everything to Clare because only she saw the true value behind money. I do not trust her husband, the man who sees wealth more than he sees family. Protect this gift, my dear. I looked straight at Colin. He knew, long before I did. But I've finally caught up. Colin's lawyers began packing up. Robert lowered his head and murmured, "We're withdrawing from this case, effective immediately." Colin looked around, searching for an ally, but the room was empty now. No backup, no pretense, just him, exposed. "This is defamation," he shouted. "I'll sue you all." I replied calmly, "Did you forget I used to run national marketing presentations? Did you really think I wouldn't know how to prepare evidence?" Deborah stood gathering the documents. "I'll be forwarding copies to the estate attorney. If there's evidence of coercion, abuse, or fraud, believe me, Colin, the court will not go easy on you." He had nothing left to say. I turned and walked toward the door, my head held high. Deborah followed, closing it behind us. The sound of that door shutting echoed like the final bell in a long, exhausting, and deceitful performance. On the drive home, I didn't feel relief. I felt awake. This marriage had never been about love. It was a contract, one only I believed in, and now I had canceled it by the book. Chapter 5. Freedom for the first time in 7 years. I didn't go home right after that confrontation. I drove aimlessly around the city, passing by old streets, where I used to walk with Grandpa as a child, and eventually stopped at the Central Park, where the same stone bench waited and birds still chirped like nothing had changed. The phone rang. It was Colin. I turned it off. No words, no need for them anymore. I needed space. I needed silence. I needed to understand what this feeling was. And then I realized it was freedom. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't have to ask for permission. Didn't have to explain myself. Didn't have to tiptoe around someone's mood just to avoid an argument because I wanted to save a little money for myself. That night I checked into a small hotel near where I used to work part-time in college. Just a simple room, clean and quiet. I brought my laptop, opened my inbox, and sent my first email to Deborah. "Can you help me prepare the divorce papers? I want everything to be clear, final, and safe." The next morning, I visited a small studio apartment across the city. The landlady, Mrs. Chin, with her neatly tied silver bun and kind smile, didn't ask too many questions when I said I needed to move in right away. I paid 6 months' rent up front, in cash, with the very money Colin once tried to steal from me. Within a day, I had moved in all I needed. It wasn't much, just the things that were truly mine. A few books, my laptop, Grandpa's photo, and Luna, my loyal golden retriever, the only one in that old house who had genuinely loved me. I left the shared home with one suitcase and Luna curled up in the back seat. As for Colin, he was still texting. First apologies, then blame, then promises. But I didn't read them anymore. I had lived long enough in a relationship where love came with conditions. My new apartment didn't have granite countertops or a fancy chandelier, but it had sunlight spilling through the windows in the morning, Luna's steady breath at my feet, and not a single heavy sigh whenever I wanted to spend money without asking. I began to write again. Not just my life, but my voice. I wrote a letter to thank Grandpa, placing his photo on the wooden shelf beside my bed, next to the old handwritten note he left me like a lasting message. "You owe no one anything, Claire. Use this gift to create something meaningful." And I understood. At last, I truly understood. The gift wasn't the money. It was the power to choose. For the first time in 7 years, I knew with certainty I was the only one who got to decide my life. Chapter 6. When I turned pain into legacy. My new life wasn't easy. I had to relearn the simplest things that had always been labeled as a man's job or nothing you need to worry about. But those outdated limits became fuel for something greater. One afternoon, I returned to my apartment after work, and opened an old wooden mailbox Grandpa used to keep in his study. Inside were handwritten notes about the hardware store where he had worked for decades. Firm strokes, small ideas on how to expand services for the local community. Dreams he never got to fulfill because illness came too soon. And then, like a gust of wind flinging open the doors of my heart, the idea came to me. Why not reopen Grandpa's store, but in a completely new way? Not just a store, but a training center for women. Women like me, who had once been financially controlled, made to believe they weren't capable of using a wrench, installing a lock, or fixing a leaky faucet on their own. I called Deborah and asked I want to start a foundation in Grandpa's name, one that helps women fix their homes, change locks, install security cameras after a divorce, or just learn a trade to take back control of their lives. Can you help me build a plan? She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said something that brought tears to my eyes, Claire. You're turning pain into a small revolution. I'm sure your grandfather would be so proud. Just a few weeks later, I founded the Edward Whitmore Home Improvement Fund, supporting women after divorce or domestic abuse. $5,000 per case. No questions asked, no judgment. Our first case was Sarah, a single mom being stalked by her ex-husband. She needed to change her locks and install security cameras. We paid for it. Sarah sent back a full-page thank you email, and in it was a line that made me cry. I didn't know anyone had ever listened to my fear until I got that phone call from your foundation. That's when I realized this was the true meaning of legacy. Not mansions, not fancy cars, but trust passed forward. The right to protect yourself, the pride in knowing you can live on your own terms. After that, I returned to Grandpa's old store, the one that had been shut down for 3 years since he fell ill. The small building was dusty, cobwebbed over every wooden shelf. But when I opened that door, the scent of wood and metal filled the air. Memories came rushing back. I made my decision I would transform it into a vocational training center just for women. Learning plumbing, basic electrical wiring, welding, power tools, doing the very things we were once told we couldn't. 3 months later, the Whitmore Vocational Center opened its doors, welcoming its first class. There's 12 women, each carrying her own story of heartbreak, but united by one thing, a hunger to reclaim life with their own 2 hands. Maria, one of them, had never held a screwdriver before, but after 4 weeks, she could change a light bulb check, a fuse box, and even teach her daughter how to replace a lock. She hugged me and whispered, I never thought I'd hold a power drill one day and feel this powerful. I smiled, because I had been her once, fragile, lost, believing in a kind of love that turned out to be a leash. But now I see clearly every woman can rebuild herself if she has the right tools, and someone who believes she can. Chapter 7. When the betrayer returned, and I wasn't afraid anymore, I still remember that morning clearly. The first message from Colin came in at 6:23 a.m. Just a few short words, Claire, we need to talk. I didn't respond. In the days that followed, the messages came more frequently. They shifted from remorse to blame, then back to begging. I know I messed up. We can still fix this. You're throwing away a marriage over money. I love you. I didn't reply. That love he spoke of turned out to be a mask, a sweet-talking form of control dressed up in empty promises. That Friday, as I left the office, I saw Colin waiting near the parking lot, a bouquet of white roses in hand, his face carefully arranged into a portrait of sorrow. I walked briskly toward my car without saying a word. Just 5 minutes, he called after me. Please, Claire. I stopped. I turned to face the man who once convinced me the world was too complicated for me to navigate on my own. What do you want to say? Colin stepped closer, his expression a mix of regret and desperation. I know I was wrong, Claire. I got too ambitious, too focused on our future. But I love you, and I can't lose you. I didn't respond. I just looked at him, and for the first time felt nothing but Emptiness. "I'll change," he said, voice pleading. "I'll go to therapy. I've canceled all the investment plans. Just give us another chance." I shook my head slowly. "No, Colin. The problem isn't your bad investments. It's not the lawyers you hired behind my back. The problem is, you never saw me as a person, just a means to an end." He stood still. "You love me?" I asked. "No. You loved what I could bring in. You loved the inheritance I got from Grandpa. You loved how obedient and compliant I used to be. But you never loved me, the woman strong enough to walk away the moment she realized she was being used." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. I'm no longer the girl who believes in empty promises. I got into my car, closed the door, and watched him shrink in the rearview mirror. Small, lost. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt at peace. 3 days later, I signed the divorce papers Deborah had prepared. Every clause so airtight Colin couldn't touch a single cent of my inheritance. I cried not out of grief, but out of release. 7 years in what I thought was love, and I had never truly known freedom. Now I tasted it, and I knew I would never let it slip away again. I walked out of the lawyer's office with a completely different spirit than the day I first walked into that marriage. No longer the soft-spoken bride chasing a fairy tale, but a woman who knew her worth. Chapter 8. I turned my pain into legacy. 6 months after signing the divorce papers, on a quiet April morning, I stood in front of my grandfather's old shop, Whitmore Hardware. The closed sign had gathered dust for 3 years. But now in my hand was a new set of keys, and in my heart a promise I'd never forgotten to turn pain into something meaningful. Inside the scent of wood metal and memory still lingered. I could almost see Grandpa behind the old counter, his worn canvas cap tilted to one side, those kind eyes lighting up every time he saw me. "Money's not the goal, Claire. The most valuable thing is what you create from it." His voice echoed in my mind, steady and full of faith, and I had honored that. 3 months later, the Whitmore Vocational Training Center for Women officially opened its doors. What used to be a hardware store was now filled with drills, power saws, workbenches, and whiteboards. Our first class had 12 women, some recently divorced, some single mothers, some survivors of abusive marriages. But they all brought what I once carried, a fierce desire to reclaim their lives. There was Maria, who had never held a screwdriver, but by week 3 was running electrical wiring and installing switches. There was Jennifer, who discovered her ex-husband had hidden 6 figures of debt for 5 years. She finished the home electrical repair course and opened her own shop. And Diana once told by her boyfriend she couldn't work in tech because women aren't meant for machines. Now she teaches advanced HVAC repair to new trainees. As I watched them, I saw fractured, blurry versions of my old self, never truly weak, just waiting to rise. A year later, I cut the ribbon on our second facility, an auto repair and small business management center for women. This time, it wasn't just about tools, it was about ownership of your career, your finances, your voice, and most importantly, your belief in yourself. I used part of my inheritance to establish the Edward Whitmore Home Renewal Fund to help women change locks, install cameras, and repair doors after walking away from toxic homes. No questions asked, no explanations required, just safety. One afternoon, I received an email from Colin's lawyer. Once again, he wanted to reevaluate financial rights based on new circumstances. I forwarded it to Deborah with just one line: "Please speak to my attorney." She replied within the hour handled. Some people never learn. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I had already won, not because I had more money, but because I finally knew who I was. That evening, I stayed at the center alone. Sunlight poured through the windows and fell upon a framed photo of Grandpa on the wall. A man with calloused hands, a gentle smile, and eyes that always looked toward what was right. I whispered softly, as if he could still hear me, I did what you asked, Grandpa. I turned your gift into something no one can ever take away. No one. Not ever. I stepped outside, locked the door, and looked up at the night sky. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was reborn, and that I have the right to protect myself. I'm no longer the woman who once cried over a will. I'm the woman who turned that will into a support network for hundreds of other women. Women who are learning to rise to grow strong and to live free. If this story speaks to you, if you've ever loved the wrong person or been manipulated by sweet, convincing lies, I want you to remember this. You're not weak. You just haven't been given the chance to fully see your own strength. And if you needed a reminder, this is it. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds you of this one truth. Yes, women can be hurt, but we are also the ones who rewrite the ending.